Hello, this is Tim64 aka On the Stoop. Welcome to this 10-minute training video. Today we're going to look at unexploitable balance. And what we're looking at here is a $60 six-man sit and go. One player has been busted. We have pocket nines. That's folded around to the small blind. Now the small blind is a pretty decent reg. In this hand he has a stack of 8.1 big blinds. Now typically when your stack falls below around 10 big blinds in a sit and go, you're normally in what we call push or fold mode, which means that if you opt for a raise, it's normally with an all-in push, and if your hand is not strong enough to push all in or to call all in, you usually fold instead of anything else. So here our opponent opts for a smallish raise, just a little bit above 2x. It's pretty unusual to see someone raising for this amount, especially blind versus blind against another reg. We tend to just see a push or fold here as well. So we are a little bit suspicious when our opponent does this. That said, when we have a hand as strong as pocket nines, we really can't do anything other than shove over the top of this hand and just hope that, you know, our opponent is on a range which doesn't include only let's say really strong nutty hands. If we were to fold a hand as strong as nines against this min raise, it would become very easy for our opponent to just min raise, and he would obtain a lot of folds from us, thereby winning a lot of chips in a situation where we would be forced to call an open shove with a hand this strong. And just to demonstrate that fact, let's have a look at the Nash range in this situation. So we bring that up and we see that the small blind should be shoving around 59% here from this position, and we have an easy call with the top 30%, and certainly anything in top 35%. So that means that we should be calling here any pair against an open shove for this opponent. So unless we can say with absolute certainty that his min raise range only includes very strong hands, we can't really do anything other than get the money in with pocket nines. So what we do is we ship over the top. Our opponent calls off his remaining stack of around 900 chips, and we go to showdown. And we see that in fact he is, let's say, trapping with a very strong hand here, a hand well inside the top 3 or 4% of all hands. I think when this kind of thing happens, our first instinct is to wonder if we somehow could have got away from our hand, you know, and we maybe kick ourselves for falling into our opponent's trap. But I think the reality is that if anyone's being trapped here, it's our opponent, because what he's doing is actually telling us a lot about the hand strength that he has when he makes this min plus raise instead of shoving. Let's imagine that our opponent has a normal hand here. Let's say a hand that's within the shoving range but not as strong as jacks. So if we bring back our Nash range here, we can see that our opponent's required to shove any king here in this situation. So let's give him a hand like king 4 offsuit, okay? So we can bring up our equity calculator and put in king 4 offsuit. Now let's take our calling range and put that in. So our calling range in this situation is the top 36.7%. So we'll put in 36.7%. Okay, now we'll equate those two hands. We can see that with our calling range in this situation, we have a strong equity advantage when we push all in with a hand that's in this range against a hand that's not a trapping hand but just an average hand, let's say, from our opponent's pushing range. And what happens here is that if he makes this small min plus raise with a hand like king 4 offsuit, and we shove all in on top of that, if we just go back to situation pre-flop, where he raises and then we shove all in, at this point right here he needs 37% equity to call off here. So if we go back to our equity calculator, we see that he has the necessary equity, but he's basically going to be forced to call off in a situation where he's never getting his money in good if he decides to min-raise his whole shoving range here. So he's going to be put in lots of rather awkward, unpleasant situations, and he also prevents himself really from ever winning the pot with the fold equity generated by an all-in shove here. So I think the reality is that what you'll see in these situations is that this min-raise is almost always a strong hand and is never a hand like King 4. Okay, because with a hand like King 4, our opponent really doesn't want to call. He would want to generate the fold equity, and therefore we're almost never going to see him show up with that kind of hand. So the question is whether he's balancing these very strong hands, let's say the hands in the top maybe 10%, with an equal number of hands which he intends to raise fold here. And my guess is that that's not the case. Okay, so let's move on to the hand that forms the sort of mirror image of this one. Okay, and here we can see that we're in the same sit and go still, same opponent here in the small blind, and now we have King 9, a hand that we're much less happy about, let's say, when we get action. So once again it's folded round to the small blind, and he has here 9.9 big blinds, which is actually more than he had in the previous hand. And again he opts for a raise, but this time he shoves all in. And this is the key point about this situation. Once we can eliminate the top of his range from the hands which he's shoving here, our call with King 9 offsuit becomes much easier for us. So let's first of all check the Nash range. Okay, so we'll just bring that up now. And we see that once again our opponent can shove over half of all of his hands. But here we have a much closer call with King 9. It is a Nash call, King 8 is the Nash range, but we're certainly much less happy about making that call than we were with 9s, which was a long way ahead of his range. But now let's see what happens if we can eliminate some of the stronger hands from his range. So with that we're going to use a tool called Sit and Go Wizard. Okay, so here we can see what happens when we make a Nash call against the opponent's Nash shoving range. So what I've done is to put here the push range given in the Hold'em Resources chart for our opponent, and we make the call with King 9, which as we saw a moment ago was within the calling range. Now because it's within the calling range, we can expect this call to show a small profit, and up here we see that it's giving a diff percentage. That's the percentage of the prize pool which we win of 0.86. So that's what we win. We win 0.86% of the prize pool when we make this call on average with King 9. And that's because, as we saw, it's not only within the Nash range but slightly ahead of the lowest possible calling hand, which we saw was King 8. Okay, now what we're going to do is to look at what happens when we eliminate from our opponent's pushing range the top hands, the hands that we have seen that he might be capable of trapping with. Okay, so we'll just, by a clever trick of the light, bring in our replacement Sit and Go Wizard calculation, and here what I've done is to reduce the opponent's shoving range so that the top 3.8% of hands are not included in that shoving range. So what we're assuming is that with the hands in that range, hands like kings, aces, queens, jacks, tens and so on, ace king perhaps, he's actually going to min raise those hands for this stack size. So what it means is that the overall range is a little bit weaker, and what we see is that now when we make the same call with the same hand, the diff percentage increases pretty significantly. It's almost double what it was in the previous hand, and that's because we've eliminated the top hand, so our particular hand does better in equity terms against this new, as we can call it, capped range. Okay, and now all we need to do is to put the last piece of the jigsaw in And we do that by making the call with King 9 against our opponent's shove here, with the knowledge that his shoving range in this spot is weaker because it's capped in that it doesn't include the top hands. So we go back to the hand, let's bring that in, and our opponent shoves on us, and we call with King 9, and we go to showdown, and we see that we're ahead of his hand. The shove, of course, is perfectly reasonable, and that's not the issue here. The issue is here that we're enabled to make this call and comfortable making this call because of what happened in the earlier hand. And what we can see in this example is that when you are not balanced against an opponent who's capable of understanding the implications of your not being balanced, you're actually going to be giving away value, giving away EV to that opponent. So in this case here, the end result is that this player here, because he tried to trap with the big hand, basically meant that he lost fold equity in subsequent hands because we could safely put him on a capped range. So hopefully you've gained something from this video, understood what people mean when they talk about being unexploitable or being balanced in a certain situation. And in this situation, what we're talking about is shoving your whole range of hands at an appropriate stack size and not trying to, slow play your monsters. Thank you very much indeed for watching. This was Tim64, aka On the Stoop, with a 10-minute training video.